What's up, Sales RXers? Look, with outbound conversion rate benchmarks being as low as 3%, it's no secret that it's really tough right now for a lot of sellers. And if you're an individual contributor or a senior leader in marketing, RevOps, sales, any role that has a revenue related metric that you have to attain, it's time to find a better pipeline channel. So, what's better than selling to someone who doesn't know you or your product? Selling to someone who does. This is where Champify comes in. Champify monitors key contacts at accounts like champions, post-sale sponsors, admins, heavy users, and they enrich that data to detect job changes, determine relevancy for outreach, and then assigns and alerts reps with those newly assigned leads. So if you haven't tried out Champify yet, you need to give it a shot. Stop spinning your wheels with outbound heavy sales motions and start selling to people you've already sold to. You can click the link below in the show description for an extended proof of concept and free data test from the team at Champify. What you'll do is click podcast in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Let them know that the Sales RX podcast sent you so they know who to give the VIP treatment to. Now let's jump into today's episode. Kind of talked about this interesting concept of a couple different aptitudes that you look for as a sales leader when you're hiring account executives, SDRs, BDRs, and also involved in cross-departmental interviews, helping people scope out the next CSM leader or maybe even like an SDR manager. So I want to really dig into these aptitudes and behaviors. Tell us a little bit about when you're hiring and when you're interviewing people, what those aptitudes are that you look for, and then we'll dive into the behaviors.
Yeah, sure. So when I'm interviewing individual contributors on the sales side, there are three aptitudes I look for. Number one being process, number two being talent, and number three being intangibles. When you interview, unfortunately, you can't screen out somebody's intangible because everybody will tell you they're built differently when they interview with you. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing I look to do is figure out how process-oriented somebody is. And there's certain ways that you can screen around it because in 99.99% of the cases that I've interviewed somebody, talent is only a lagging indicator of how process-oriented somebody is. So that is the absolute thing I look for the most. And there are certain almost micro behaviors that I like to screen out and add a lens to when I'm evaluating talent for a position.
Yeah, and I like how you say that thing about the intangibles because I've always said that, in an interview, I've literally said to people like, hey, Billy, everybody that interviews says they're a quick learner, they're this, they're that. But if I were to talk to three of your closest enemies, what would they say about you? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and they all hit quota every time out.
Yeah,
and none of them have a weakness. 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some of these behaviors that are driven by these aptitudes when you scope these aptitudes?
Yeah. No matter what, whether it's an individual contributor on very top of funnel, whether it's an AE or whether it's a manager, the absolute number one behavior I screen for is the ability to critically think. Critical thinking is the absolute most important skill that every salesperson has. And you cannot be successful unless you're good at it. And I would endeavor anybody take a look at the number one, number two, number three rep in your sales org, whether you like them or dislike them. I guarantee you will not say they're not very, very good at critically thinking under pressure. Mm-hmm. So critical thinking, absolutely number one. Number two, if it's an account executive, is process management. And I almost look at that in two different ways. We're going to educate a seller on sales cycles, what the first step looks like all the way to the last one. We're also going to educate them on Salesforce and any other systems, but being able to manage a process and just be able to replicate the steps in everything you do really allows me to remove that managerial bottleneck and feel confident that this individual is going to be able to handle the job responsibilities in and out without very much manager intervention. Mm-hmm. Number three, this is the big one. I feel like we already touched on this a bit, is self-awareness. you have to be self-aware in sales, and you are not doing yourself any favors if you can't tell a hiring manager at least one thing that you struggle with, because we all struggle with a lot of things. And take a look at your chief revenue officer at every company. They have weaknesses, and you have to be self-aware in that you can evaluate a situation objectively. Otherwise, we're all going to see right through you when we interview. Number 4, this goes a bit with process management, is autonomy. We hear people talk a lot about act first and ask for forgiveness later. I want to see that too, because especially in a larger sales org, there are times when I've had up to 14 direct reports on the IC side. If everybody is waiting for me to answer questions before they go out and operate, then I've slowed down everybody. And I've created not just like a bottleneck, but almost like an hourglass for everyone. And then number 5 for an account executive, pitch aptitude. This is something that's very important. When you get to that AE level, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can sell a little bit. And when I interview, I like to screen out for pitch aptitude to see if I put you in front of somebody to present a solution, how do you do? What's your presence look like?
Even at an SDR level, you can do that too. You can have them
You can.
telling me the story of why you're leaving your company, and then watch how they squirm. Like that's one of my favorite ones.
But it's important with SDRs. With every account executive job for the most part has a mock pitch, which really we're looking at what's your pitch aptitude look like. How do you think autonomously? How did you critically think through that process? But with SDRs, it's almost entrapment to a degree. If you have them pitch your product or do a mock role play, what if they've never done a phone sale before?
Yeah.
SDR is a little bit of a greener pasture for some of these newer reps, and it's not the only thing that matters when you're screening out SDR talent.
Yeah, it kind of the way you can kind of get that out of an SDR is one of two ways. If they're a current SDR or they're career pivoting, maybe they're a field sales rep for a pest control company. Ask them to pitch the product that they're selling right now to some degree. Like, hey, do a cold call with me or write me a cold email as if I was a prospect in your current product. If they're complete career pivot, we're talking, school teacher to SDR, military vet to SDR. I kind of ask them to tell me what they learned in their current environment that they feel would translate into sales skills, because then they kind of tell me the story of what they've done, and they're selling me on how being a teacher is applicable to sales to the best of their knowledge. But I agree with you on the entrapment side, and it's interesting you bring that up because I have an SDR in my SDR to AE program who's like, oh, okay, I've been here 8 months. They're hiring a mid-market AE, and they're allowing me to interview for the role. But the first step is I have to do a mock disco. And I said, you're not going to get it. I want you to recognize that you're probably not going to get this job. They're having you do a mock disco so they can say he is not qualified for this yet because he did not do a great disco. They should understand that you're not going to do a good disco. That's part of your training that you're going to get as an AE. Especially if you're a first-time AE, they need to understand that. What's more important is I would try to have the conversation first with the hiring manager about why you think your skills that you have as an SDR at that company translate. Show him what you understand about feature, action, benefit of the product. But you're not going to have effective discovery as someone would do discovery down to the point where it would make me want to qualify you. If anything, it's going to disqualify you. So I totally agree that sometimes that can be entrapment depending on the situation.
Yeah, it's funny first of all, you said something. So I have had members on my team that were an Orkin man, a school teacher, and I've had many military veterans. And shout out to Sam D'Souza, wherever you're at. I hope you listen to this. He was a former school teacher. He's one of the best sales guys I've ever had reporting to me. I'm a lot more interested at the SDR level in mental toughness. So if you want to do a situation where you do a mock role play or whatever with an SDR, I don't really care about fundamentals so much at that point as how do you rise to the occasion? Because in fact, I'm going to beat you down in the mock role play, and then I'm going to give you feedback, and I'm going to tell you a couple of the things you did well and a couple of things you didn't do well, because I want to measure your coachability. And so mental toughness matters so much more when you're screening a career pivot or somebody who's fresh out of high school, fresh out of college, and entering the workforce.
Yeah, I like that. Now, one thing that I'm trying to get out of the habit of on the podcast is we get a lot of great guests to talk a lot theoretically about what, right? What should you do? This, that, the other. We understand why we should do it. Give us a little bit of your secret sauce. How? How can I scope for some of these things? Like, what are some questions that you ask when you're interviewing, whether it be SDRs or AEs, especially when it comes to things like, you talked a little bit about that self-awareness. Like, I know the
Yeah,
questions that I ask, like we talked about, hey, everybody says they're this, this, and this, but like, what would your closest enemy say about you? Like, that's almost like the, hey,
that's
what
a
is your
good one.
greatest weakness? You know what I mean? It gets somebody to think a little differently, where they get put in a box and they can't really go, oh, I'm always on, I care too much. Remember Dwight Schrute from The Office? My greatest
Uh-huh.
weakness
I
is I
work
care
too
too much.
hard. I care
Yeah.
too much. Yeah.
But like, what are some questions that you ask when you're scoping out these aptitudes or these behaviors that help you understand the person that you're talking to, and being able to also, I mean, as a leader, it's important to be able to call BS a little bit. We know everybody's trying their hardest
Definitely.
to land a role, but ultimately we want to make sure we're a good fit for them, because if we're not, it's just bad for both sides, right? So what are some of those
Totally.
questions that you ask in the interview process?
Yeah. So I'll kind of go easiest and then I'll give you one of my harder ones. And I actually want to see how you answer. I'll put you on the
Oh
spot.
no.
But
Oh no.
look, for self-awareness, I'm not looking for somebody who's perfect because I know that doesn't exist. Perfection doesn't exist in the physical world, but
Hmm.
you can, I think it's very fair to ask somebody, and it's something that I often ask when I'm trying to suss out self-awareness is tell me about a time where you disagreed with something the management team said. What was the inciting incident? How did you handle it with your manager in terms of the conversation? And what were the results? Because what I'm looking for is I want a real example of, you know, Chet told me that I wasn't hitting my numbers, so I needed to make 200 dials a day, but I only had 500 accounts. So it wasn't something I agreed with because I was going to burn through my entire list in no time. So I pulled him aside and we had a virtual meeting and we talked about my concern about lead burn and the actual quality of phone calls. And as resolution, we walked out and we said, okay, 200 is way unrealistic, but I can make 75 a day and not burn through my list. Those are the real examples that I want to hear, and it's almost paired back to critical thinking of like, here was a real problem, and here was my subjective issue with it. Here's how we behaved as adults, and here's how we resolved it. I think that's a good self-awareness question. When it comes to process management, very simple. I look at processes, do I look at things binary? This is how it is concrete. So if I'm to ask you, tell me about your KPIs you were measured against. If you're currently in a role or you're coming out of a role, you should know what you were measured against. You should be able to tell me, I needed to generate a quota of $8,000 a month. Our average deal was $1,500, so I had to close 5 to 6 deals a month in order to do it. In order to get there, on my close rate of 40%, I needed, what is that, 15 deals to sit.
Hmm.
I want to hear these things. If you don't, if you can tell me that, you pass kind of the first phase of that test. The
Yeah.
second phase of it is, okay, great. What systems did you use? How did you go about using them daily? What was the time it took you to do Salesforce administration? What was the contract management? Did you have a deal desk or did you have to create your own? How much time was spent prospecting versus down funnel activity? Those are things that help me get an understanding of process management. And it's pretty easy to be able to tell if somebody's really on top of their process or if they're kind of puttering through every one of their answers to try to make it sound like they know what they're talking about.
Hmm.
My favorite interview question, and anybody that knows me that's been in an interview with me is going to roll their eyes when they hear this, but I like critical thinking because an important part of my role as a manager is to be able to communicate. The kind of key to communication is I need to be able to communicate a message to you based on the way you process information. Otherwise, everything I tell you is going to go in one ear and out the other. So I found a great question from, I believe it was McKinsey & Co., the consulting company that they ask in an interview. And I've kind of blended it to sales. So I can learn a whole lot about the way you think about things based on the way you answer this. So you want to try it out?
Oh yeah, let's do it. I love it.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So Chet, I am your client and you're a consultant on my behalf. And I hand you a very large egg. And I say, Chet, inside of this egg is a dinosaur. And I want to monetize this dinosaur for as much money as you can possibly help me make. What is the first thing you do after I hand you the dinosaur egg?
Oof. Good Lord, you're really putting me on the spot here. So I'm your consultant, you're my client, you have this giant egg and there's a dinosaur inside. How do I monetize it? Okay. Great question. I'd say the first thing I would actually do is go find someone to support the dinosaur so that we knew that the dinosaur would live once it came out of the egg. Because if the dinosaur hatches out of the egg and we don't have someone who's a veterinarian or a dinosaur expert to keep the dinosaur alive after its birth, we'd all be screwed. That's the way that I think about it.
All right, perfect. So I learned some things about the way you think from that. And there's basically two answers you're going to get about the way people think through a situation. There are some people that kind of take the end point, which would be monetization, and they work backwards to the start point, which an answer for that might be, okay, interesting. How much money do you want to make off of this? Like, what is the number that you've decided? And then once you know a number, you work backwards. When you think about sellers, that would be, all right, my quote is 10,000, and I start working backwards. How many deals do I need to close? How many do I need to sit? How many demos do I need to book in order to sit that many meetings? How many calls, emails do I need to make to get it out there? Then there are people that start from the front and they go all the way to the end point. So the perfect answer for people that think A to B to C to D would be, well, first I want to validate that it's a dinosaur inside and not like a very big chicken egg that you gave me. Yeah. And then you would go through the validation process and find somebody to survive the egg all the way to the point where it hatches, where you can make revenue off of it. So if I were to work with you, I assume if you and I were solving a problem, we would start at the very beginning and then move A, B, C, D all the way till we hit the end point. Would that be correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely a builder. I can't, like, I've always said that too. Like, that's why I'm not good at art, because I can't see the end thing and build to it. I have to start with, like, I know what I'm trying to get to, but I have to take every step incrementally to get there, which can be a negative thing when you build. It can be kind of tough. Think of architects. They don't just go, okay, let's put the foundation here, let's put the stairs here. Like, they build backwards to some extent. But I'm also a pessimist, so I probably think of all the things that go wrong. That's why I'm like, let's make sure the dinosaur doesn't die on us, man.
Well, see, so now I've learned a ton about you. And if you and I ever work together, if I'm communicating something to you, I would start from the very beginning and work chronologically to the end point rather than work backwards.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to steal that from you, man, because that is...
Take it.
I don't know where you learned that or if you came up with it. Either way, I don't care. I love the spread of information, and I'm going to use it.
Take it, awesome. Please.
Billy, this has been great. Thanks for the time that you've lent us today. If folks want to interact with you, how can they get in touch with you? How can they get a hold of you?
Yep. Find me on LinkedIn. First name Billy, Billy. Last name Stein, Stein, as you can probably see in the lower left corner of my box. And communicate with me. I'd love to chat with you on anything sales related.
Awesome. And we'll put a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes below, as well as links to the Sales RX community resources and resources with the Sales Doctor and how you can interact with us in the podcast further. That's all we have for today's episode. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Billy.
Awesome. Bye, Chet.